Humans, the alpha species, the apex predator, the very gatekeepers of this world. With us sits all the knowledge ever. We have more knowledge than anything else. We are more intelligent than any beast, than any tree, than anything possibly in the entire universe. We've learned so much through science. Our technology is far beyond comprehension. We've begun to see the world in a new light. We've brought in new ways of doing things to make the old seem so irrelevant and basic, even though that was only just maybe 50 years ago. The time jump we have from the 1980s, which seems so very recent, to modern time is insane. It's crazy to think about that as of the making of this video, we are closer to 2030 than we are to 2015. Let that sink in. I think it's really important for us to understand just how much we think of ourselves as a species. We are the most intelligent. We have the best form of communication than any other animal. While dogs bark and dolphins use their echolocation, a bird may use its vocal cords to sing to its mate. But we're the only ones with an intricate language, the ability to write, to speak, to converse, to have debates and discussions, arguments, to speak in romantic ways, to have fun, to witness something as communication and enjoy it and learn and understand it, like me speaking to you right now. But are we really that smart? Are we really that great? Are we that advanced? And are we really the dominant species of the universe? Are we the only ones in the universe? Arrival is a movie that focuses on a lot of concepts, but the main one I truly believe is communication, language, and how we are able to express ourselves and perceive things. So before I actually start with the video essay, I'm going to have a little bit of a rant, a little bit of a, so to speak, talk with you, where I explain basically how insane our languages are. So if you don't want to hear that entire rant and you just want to hear about the movie, skip ahead to this time and you can hear what my thoughts are on just the film itself. However, if you want to hear me go on for quite a while, which won't be too long, but decently long, you can watch starting from here. And I do think it would be helpful because it will add some context to what I'm going to say future in the video and help you to understand better possibly the movie with my very long sort of lecture. Arrival is a movie that talks about all of this, and something I have to talk about as an English major is how insane language really is. Like, think of what language is. Language is so complex, and yet it seems so basic to us. For instance, if I put this word on the screen, you know what it is. But why? Because you have literally just seen a series of shapes and curves and lines, but somehow your brain instantly was able to figure out exactly what that meant. But what if I put this word on the screen? You more than likely have no idea what this says. It just looks like a bunch of jumbled lines. Maybe you see a person in it. Maybe you see a dragon or a tree, but you don't really know what it's saying to you at all. It's convoluted. It's alien to you. It's completely out of your understanding. However, someone who reads this would look at the letters I just showed you and most likely not understand what I just displayed on the screen, which you perfectly just comprehended within a millisecond of seeing it. Language is so complex in the sense that it really is just a sound that instantly means something to you, but what is that meaning? Can you really describe to me what the word "and" means? It's such a simple word that we use in almost every single sentence of our everyday life. The word "and" is prominent. But what is "and"? "And" is what exactly? Sure, you can explain it as something that connects two thoughts and progresses a series of concepts that you were speaking of, but that still doesn't describe what is "and." Dog, I can say, is an animal. Tree, I can say, is a form of life that is made of wood. And I can tell you that a car is a machine that's a form of transportation, but what is "and"? And why do we understand it so well? Do you understand what I'm saying? Communication is extremely complex. I know this just seems like a rant, but I really think we need to understand it as that before we go into this video so you can truly understand the film we're talking about today. Because language is strange. For instance, if I say this upcoming word, you're going to understand this perfectly. If I were to say to you, "hello," you understand exactly what that means. If I am to say the word movie, you know what that means. But suppose right now I say this, Berishte. It's just gibberish to you. You're like, that's not a word. But your brain may have thought it sounded similar to something that's a word it does know. But that's literally our language. It's just complex sounds, shapes, and meanings that we somehow have put together that somehow we have the knowledge and ability to use. We know it's the right way, but how and why? Why do you know you're speaking correctly? Because a book told you? Well, how did the writer know that? This is the complexity of our language, and it's extremely difficult to understand, and it fascinates me because of that. Throughout its years of existence, and since very early in its creation, Hollywood has put out dozens, hundreds, if not maybe even thousands, of movies centering around the concept of aliens coming to Earth. The premise of these films have varied, some going from the extent of them coming down to Earth as companion or possibly becoming connected to humans, like in E.T., a film where the alien that comes down to Earth, though perceived as dangerous, is nothing more than stranded child essentially on a foreign world that forms a bond with a young boy in a way that no one else can understand. In the film Under the Skin, aliens are portrayed more in the sense of discovery. They're trying to find out what they can about the human race and about our world. In other films like Independence Day and War of the Worlds, aliens are portrayed as violent. They blow up the White House, they destroy our cities, and more importantly than anything, they are terrifying. There are other films where they aren't necessarily coming to Earth. Films like Alien, where when we enter their world, their area, outer space, where man was never originally meant to be, we are exposed to the horrors of what can be beyond the stars, in space, where no one can hear you scream. But despite the countless interpretations of alien life or extraterrestrials coming down to our planet or us coming to them, I believe there are no two films that tell it in such a unique way as Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Arrival. Arrival is a story that is only best understood with hindsight. On your initial watch, you'll have tons of questions about this movie, as I did after initially seeing it. I left the theater scratching my head trying to figure out what I'd just seen. I was young, and it seemed so large and complex, and I didn't understand most of what had happened. But as I got older and watched it more and more, I began to understand. Also, reading on what the director had to say and what other people had analyzed, and reading into the novel is based on, so much became clear to me. Because Arrival isn't a movie just about aliens. It's about humans. It's about time and loss and inevitability. There is so much packed into one film disguised as an alien invasion film. And that's part of the genius. There's so much to unpack here. There's a reason Arrival was nominated for the Oscars it was nominated for, including Best Picture, because it was a thought-provoking movie that made you think, and, more importantly, has its characters think. But rather than me sitting here talking to you in vague generalities about a movie that I consider to be one of the best of all time and a true masterpiece of our generation, let's sit down and really break down Arrival, what it means, and things that I have found through the years for connections and everything that involves the making of this great movie. To start with, we really couldn't talk about this film unless we honored and mentioned what it derived from, where it got all of its ideas, the basis of what it was. It's a novel called Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. He said he was inspired after seeing a play where a man is knowing that someone he's related to is dying of cancer. I don't want to give away the entire premise because I want to explain this movie in a way that's comprehensive, but also gives you the feeling of seeing Arrival for the very first time. Without further ado, let's get started. Arrival was released in September 1st of 2016. It was directed by Denis Villeneuve, an acclaimed director who's done movies such as Dune, Blade Runner 2049. The movie stars Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Forrest Whitaker, and their characters are crucial, though they may just be players in a larger set. We start the film with narration from our protagonist, Dr. Louise Banks, played by the great Amy Adams. In a flashback sequence, we see her with her daughter, They grow up, they have ups, downs, and joy, but her daughter is taken from her with no time left at all because she had a disease that couldn't be cured. Some important things to note are the concepts in here of how things work. Similarities being the same thing or starting and finishing very similarly. For instance, her daughter's name is Hannah, which is spelled the same forward and backwards. Many of the shots in this movie are repeats of shots from earlier. The camera moves in the exact same way, or the actors move in the exact same way. On top of that, there's the concept of the fact that the first words she says to her daughter are the very same words she echoes to her and utters as she dies. They are the same. During her narration, she tells us she no longer believes in endings and beginnings since the arrival of the aliens. Louise's character trudges down a hallway that is circular in shape before it transitions to the present day. Here we find her teaching her class when a student asks her to please turn on the television. Here, everyone sees a shocking report. Aliens are real, and they've come to Earth. There are 12 landings currently all around the world. Humans naturally are panicked, and that's something I want to really say about this movie. This movie handles an alien arrival as closely as it possibly can to the way it might be in real life. Humans reacting, governments reacting the way they might. However, something to note is Louise's extreme amount of calmness here. She shows very little to no panic at all, or excitement, or stress for that matter. She seems resolved. She, as a matter of fact, calmly walks to her car, goes into her house, removes her shoes while talking to her mom on the phone, and doesn't bat an eye. While at home, a United States Colonel, played by Forrest Whitaker, shows up. He brings her a recording of someone trying to communicate with the alien creatures. He asks Louise if she can translate it, but she explains to him she can't translate from just a muffled clip. Something interesting to really note here is the way the interpreter is talking to the alien. The interpreter is using language in a way where he expects the alien to be able to understand him, asking questions as if the alien should be able to understand him, as if he is superior. This shows the complex of humans. We consider everything to have to be able to make sense for ourselves. Other things should conform to us, despite the fact that these aliens are massively more advanced than us, arriving in ships shaped like a lens, as if to show us a new way to look at the world. These things traveled from another universe to ours, possibly, but yet he expects it to come and conform to his way? The Colonel leaves slightly frustrated. However, later he does come back and gets Louise aboard a helicopter in the middle of the night to tell her they are going to use her after all. They want her to translate for them, to tell them what the aliens are saying. Once aboard the helicopter, she meets Ian Donnelly. He is someone who is an expert in math. He tries to talk to her, but she can't hear him because she's not wearing her headset. This is an interesting concept to watch throughout the movie, which is the failure to communicate or miscommunication. Denis Villeneuve takes careful time. It's a slow buildup. Sure, there is no booming music, there's no choir singing in the background as we witness this ship, because that's not what we're feeling. We're feeling something else entirely. We're feeling fear, confusion, intrigue. The ship looks nothing the way anyone would picture it, hovering above the air, not even touching, as if it's so above us in a way that we need to come to it. We have to ascend. As the aliens have come this far, we must take the final steps to reach them. It's solid in shape, dark in color, as mentioned before, was designed to look similar to a lens. During this time, Louise sees the former interpreter carried out dead. At this point, our brains go to all kinds of places. What did the aliens do to him? What made him die? Again, as an audience member, we begin to jump to similar conclusions to the characters in the movie. Eventually, the moment comes. It's time for the humans to ascend into the ship to communicate with the aliens. This is our first time witnessing this as well. So again, we witness this all through the eyes of Louise, but we feel as if we're experiencing similar emotions. It's a slow climb. And eventually, everything begins to turn. And it's almost like everyone has floated into a different world. When they finally reach their destination, in front of them is an illuminated plane of what appears to be glass. One thing I've really always thought about this is this very much reminds me of what people describe when they die, when they tell you to go towards the light, where there's supposed to be an omnipotent being, maybe a god, that's going to be before you. It seems almost as if the humans are reaching that level. They're seeing something that's not only otherworldly, but majestic, and possibly even something that should be considered religiously important. And eventually, the creatures appear. Something important to notice is that the creatures appear here in many ways. They don't feel right. They feel almost dark and looming. Another thing to notice about them is not just the fact of their shape, which by the way resembles almost like a hand of God reaching out again, but at the same time resembles death or images we'd see of the Grim Reaper. It's something that looks alien yet familiar to us at the same time. They move slowly. Even their way of communication is not in words. We assume throughout the entire movie they're trying to communicate with us by talking, but why? Because that's the way that we communicate? If you think about it, humans are the only creatures that communicate by use of 100% a convoluted and extremely detailed language that we pretty much never stop learning. Our language is so important to us. We can't even describe emotions without using our own language. More importantly, we can't manage to form thoughts oftentimes without the use of words. Try right now to think of anything without words. Everything is formed in your brain. If you picture it, you still know what that is because of the word. A perfect example of this is the country of North Korea. In that country, there is no word I because it takes out the individuality of every person. Instead, everything is we. So people think of themselves as a collective. Furthermore, there's oftentimes in North Korea no use of the word love because failure to express or understand this concept through language makes it hard for people to truly get a handle on it or to understand what's going on. So again, we are expecting these creatures to communicate, but we soon find out they're communicating in a far more advanced way. Louise is seemingly overwhelmed after this initial experience. However, as they go back, they begin to understand even more. At one point, Louise presses her hand against the glass, and what almost feels like a jump scare, we see the alien take one of its limbs and suddenly press it against it to match her movement. They are trying to communicate. Another thing is the government is trying to figure out if these are threats at all or not. But realistically, these beings are so far ahead of us, they could have destroyed us already. Another thing is, what kind of life form even is this? Does it have a brain? Does it have a heart? This is never explained. We just keep perceiving it the way the audience member and the people in the movie think it is. These characters are only going by what they assume to be true. Eventually, she tries to communicate with it by writing her name. The aliens respond by writing what appears to be an ink-like swirl in the atmosphere. Unable to understand what this is, they have to think. Soon, Louise figures something out. The aliens are communicating by forming words in that very way, only it's not a word. Everything that a heptapod, which is the name of the creatures, communicates through, whether it be through them making audible sounds or making a form of writing for us, it's a complete thought. The roundness is because of the fact that they perceive time and language differently than we do. It's a complete thought. There's no beginning, there's no middle, there's no end. Everything is seen as one. It's the equivalent of if you looked at a ball. There is no obvious to a round yellow ball beginning, middle, or end. If you turn it every time, it will itself change, but you still understand that it's a ball. That's the best analogy I could come up with this, because this is an extremely complex concept that even for the characters in the movie, it's hard to grasp. Louise also talks about the more you immerse yourself in a language, you almost get to become a part of it. You begin to change with it because of your knowledge. Something to note, the governments who all have had one of these ships arrive in their area have set up a communication center. 12 screens of all nations trying to communicate whatever they learn to each other. No one is to keep secrets. Everyone is to divulge everything they know. China, however, seems very eager to start a war by simply destroying the vessels. We see that rioting, looting is going on. People are in uproar. But for what? Nothing's happened. The heptapods have done nothing. The Colonel approaches Louise, expressing he is very displeased with the current progress. He wants things to move faster. She explains to him it's not that easy. She does this in 2 different scenes by using 2 different examples. One, she explains to him on a whiteboard in an extremely intelligent scene how language works, and that if the heptapods don't understand how our language works, they can't form a word because they don't communicate the way we do. For us, everything's a beginning, middle, and end, and certain words placed in different places mean different things. Also, she explains later how British colonists who came to Australia misunderstood the meaning of kangaroo and thought it was the name of the animal, when that was not what the natives were saying. Through all this, we see Louise constantly become more exhausted. She sometimes appears to doze off and have dreams where she flashes back, seemingly, to the time spent with her daughter, both good and bad. Her husband apparently left her. He's no longer there. Maybe something went wrong, but they're divorced, and the child is currently going back and forth. The 2 heptapods are named Abbott and Costello, which again is something that is reminiscent of communication. Abbott and Costello were classic comedians. These 2 constantly misunderstood each other or miscommunicate in skits and sketches that they did. At one point, Ian decides to visit Louise to express his concerns over how much she's been working and how hard it is. He asks her about what she said about becoming completely enthralled in a language and how that can change you. As she's talking to him and how everything's been changing in her life and the way she's been acting, when she goes to look at him, we get this scene. Now, while this may just seem to be an attempt at a cheap jump scare, or something along those lines, I genuinely believe there's more to it than that. I believe that with later events explained, we'll understand that this is actually Louise becoming so convoluted in her thoughts and her perception of time. Things are overlapping and she's seeing things in a different way. Another thing to note is how nothing in this movie feels different. We don't feel like much has changed since the movie first started, and for good reason. This shot towards the beginning of the movie where she looks out the window at the place where she lives looks eerily similar to the shots where she's communicating with the heptapods. This is purposefully done. We feel a familiarity, a similarity to it, in fact. We feel like we've been here before and we never feel like it's changed. Another thing to note is throughout the movie you go from viewing the heptapods as these alien, strange, almost scary figures to we want to return, we want to know more, and when we see them, we really don't feel strange anymore. Nothing about them seems off. As a matter of fact, we find ourselves siding with them because Louise is now. She's the person that we are seeing everything through, and we ourselves are understanding that these creatures seemingly are doing nothing wrong. Suddenly, the entire film shifts. It goes from a movie of us and heptapods, 2 cultures, different species, different levels of knowledge, learning about and from each other, to something totally different, a ticking time bomb. Someone believes, as one of the interpreters, that the heptapods mentioned a weapon. The whole thing is we really don't know what they said, because even with the knowledge we have, we're assuming that we're understanding them correctly. Everything said in this movie could be wrong. We could have misunderstood them the entire time, but this is the closest they have. Louise makes a fantastic point saying that the way they communicated this, if she's understanding it, it could mean tool or weapon. However, people are all, particularly governments and armies, getting ready for something worse. They believe it is a weapon, and they might have to act. Louise continues to have flashbacks and appears even more exhausted. Eventually, though, what happens is her and Ian make a final attempt to communicate, as pretty much no one wants to authorize them, and unknowing to them, when they decide to go back into this ship to communicate with the heptapods, the army has planted C4 in an attempt to destroy the ship. While trying to communicate, the heptapods send through the ink that they shoot out an extremely convoluted message. It is insanely detailed. But before anything can happen, one of the heptapods sends Louise and Ian away to save them from the explosion. One of the two heptapods is killed. Somehow, these aliens knew this explosion was going to happen. They saved Ian and Louise with knowledge, but somehow, if they knew this was going to happen, they didn't attempt to stop it. Waking up, they discover that pretty much all communication has been cut off. Again, this goes off the basis and the whole idea of communication failing, causing an incident. Countries in our own world, while trying to communicate with an alien force, are not communicating with each other. This is causing so many issues. And now everyone is turning off their screens. No one will tell each other anything that anyone knows. Now what? Everyone agrees most likely the best thing to do is to destroy these ships, while others are still unsure to make a move, and China continues pushing forward to plan an attack. Louise finally goes up on her own into the ship, and she does the one thing they haven't done this entire movie, which is to go past the barrier. Up to this point, there's almost been this seemingly godlike barrier. As I mentioned before, it seems like the realm between heaven and earth. When she reaches there, it's like you're not supposed to pass on and get this knowledge. There are so many stories and religions and mythology and great written artistic pieces of literature of people going to the heavenly realm to obtain knowledge. Louise is accepted in, and for the first time, we almost see the entire look of a heptapod. The heptapods, as a matter of fact, look almost nothing like we thought they did. What we thought they looked like was only about 1/3 of the body, the bottom half. When Louise finally sees it, it appears almost as if the shape of a giant being, an omnipotent, all-knowing, knowledgeable creature with deep sounds echoing and a heavenly-like white mist of light as it looks down on her. This is what it appears like. It almost appears like paintings we see of God as it looks down, but at the same time as looking knowledgeable, there's something dark about it. That's one thing I really love about Arrival, that is the fact that we never truly do understand why the heptapods arrive with this knowledge, what the purpose is, because we don't know the future. Louise asks what the heptapods became here. What did they mean by tools and weapons? The heptapod tries to communicate clearly to her, and the heptapods end up getting through, and we discover something about the movie that changes the entire perception of what we just watched. Louise makes a realization that, though not explicitly stated to us, when you actually pay close attention and think about what you're seeing on screen, you think about things said, you understand. The flashbacks she was having to her daughter are not flashbacks. That is the future. Can Louise tell the future? Not really. But what she has gained from the heptapods is something far superior to that. Just like their form of communication, the heptapods perceive time as one complete thought. There is no beginning or end. The way we perceive things, there's the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, the end. A heptapod would see that as one complete thing. They would know the ending, they would know the beginning, they would know the middle. This is why they were able to save Louise and Ian from the explosion. They knew what was going to happen. And because she immersed herself in this language and learned so much from them, Louise now has that same ability. Those are visions of the future of her daughter that she will have with none other than Ian. These two will become married, and when he is faced with the fact that she herself, Louise, knows the future but still have a daughter, He can't handle that, and he divorces her, still loving his daughter, but just unable to cope with the reality one day she'll die. Louise now no longer perceives time with a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is the reason her words to her daughter Hannah, which is spelled the same, forwards and backwards, were the same words at the beginning of the movie and the same words when her daughter died. This is also the reason she says at the beginning of the movie she no longer believes in endings or beginnings. The final shot of her walking down a circular hallway is the very beginning of the shot we saw towards the beginning of the film of her walking down a circular hallway. Something, though, to say is with all this knowledge that we now know, the entire film we need to talk about again, this time through hindsight and with the knowledge of understanding that this is all her seeing things in a round, complete thought. Something to mention is that the fact that Louise says that she's able to figure out some of these concepts and ideas by the designs within those circular concepts that they project with ink, because it links back to things we used to use. Had the heptapods arrived before and someone had used the same thing, they may have arrived in the past and we didn't know, and they transfer information to the future. However, it is clear the heptapods are sharing this information with us because they believe they'll need our help in the future. But with what? Again, why are they here? This also could be an answer of why the scientist who was an interpreter in the beginning was seen dead. Maybe he was having the same dreams and experiences Louise was, and they drove him to madness and eventually death. Her entire encounter with the final time with the heptapods seems almost dreamlike. Almost every time we see them, it seems dreamlike, with this misty fog covering them. But soon, we feel everything's different. For instance, in that vision I mentioned earlier when she was talking to Ian, where it appears right in her room, the heptapod is not covered by any amount of fog or mist. It's crystal clear, as if now she can see its true form. Something else to notice is in this movie, because of this concept of everything being one complete thought, there is tons and tons of imagery of round objects. And not just things like ovals, but in general, built into the wardrobe, into the set design. This also begs the question, how come in parts of the movie she seems sad and down? I mean, we all thought it was because her daughter died, but no. Could it be the fact that she knows the future where her daughter dies? We don't really ever know this. At anything, Louise doesn't seem so much sad now if you think about it. She seems like someone burdened with so much wisdom and knowledge. She knows almost everything in the world, in the sense that she knows everything she will, has, and is experiencing all at once. Can you imagine that feeling? Something else to note is the change of expressions and the way that Louise talks about the heptapods. Originally, there's fear, anxiety. She comes back panting and stressed out, her eyes bulging, seemingly cold, as if she's having cold sweats, and she refers to them as this alien thing that she's communicating with. By the end, though, she seems to talk to them as if they're her ally, as if there's something now connected because she's learned, she's followed, and now there's something that she views differently. Everyone in the movie fails to understand this concept, all that is except Louise. Another interesting contrast is the fact that something that these aliens seemingly brought to bring everyone together to help us perceive everything differently is tearing everyone apart. In fact, it's tearing the whole world apart, putting us on the verge of a war. And even despite this, they still don't retaliate. Something to note is the fact that Abbott sacrificed himself, knowing full well before he even came to Earth he would die. But that's even another concept we need to tackle in this movie. Do the heptapods die? What are they? Are they a life form? Do they have a heart? Do they have a brain? What are they? There are things on Earth that live that do not pertain to what we conceive life as, but they're still very much alive. A Venus flytrap is a perfect example of something that reacts, eats, absorbs, but it's not an animal, it's not a creature, but it's still very much alive. Trees are something similar as well. There's so much we have that's this way, and we really have no way of knowing exactly what a heptapod is. We don't know if anything we perceive or come to conclude in this movie is actually even true. Is the whole movie seen through the eyes of Louise? I mean, obviously yes, so that leads to questions, are we seeing everything differently? Are we understanding everything differently? Before he dies, when Abbott explodes all this ink, showing everything that the heptapods know, which will take literal years, maybe decades, maybe even over a century for humans to properly understand. Meaning that, first of all, Louise will have to pass on this knowledge, but secondly, what does this mean, though? Does this mean events of the future will happen? Can we change events? I don't think so. The movie seems like we know the events, but they can't be changed. And it's not so much that you're telling the future as much as in every moment of your life, you're able to perceive the past, the current, and the future at the same time. Almost like watching this movie. After watching the film, you, just like Louise, have learned a new way to understand. You understand the movie differently. You can understand everything about the movie from the beginning, middle, and end because you know what's going to happen. But just like Louise in Humans of Earth, you can't change what happens in the movie. You can only witness it. This film is literally you learning with Louise. That is fantastic to me. The fact that we don't just come along for the ride, but the movie literally is you going through the exact same experience that Louise does. And that is such a genius move by everyone involved. Arrival is a film that takes a lot of dissecting to understand. To be perfectly honest, there's a lot about it I don't understand right now, but the film is something that requires revisiting. If you haven't seen Arrival, definitely go check it out. It's a film that will genuinely make you think. If you have seen it, I suggest revisiting it again. And don't just watch it, try to find things within it. I hope this video was in some way helpful or maybe showed a point of view you didn't know before. I'm just trying my best, and I'm aware I've probably not covered topics that are things that other people have talked about, and maybe I said things that were confusing, but nevertheless, I tried my best, and I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I'd really love to hear your guys' comments about what you think about the movie, or what you thought about this video. I really appreciate all of you, and until next time, stay safe.